Right, now we deal with the last item, statement of proposal for consultation. We've got...
Pleased with the collaboration happened.
I'm not sure this framework on the cost and what's the impacts and how do we get it going.
I've asked Diane Brandish to come down, and she's on her way to answer any financial questions you might have.
Right. Okay, so the provisions noting the decision of the Anglican Synod, this decision triggers the special consultative procedure which we agreed to at the time of considering a proposed council grant, receives the staff report, agrees on the mechanism by which the proposed grant will be funded should the council approve the proposed grant, adopts the statement of proposal attached to the report noting that the agreed funding mechanism will be included, and authorises the General Manager, Finance and Commercial to approve any non-material changes, approves the consultation process contained in the statement of proposal, and appoints a hearings panel to hear oral submissions on the proposal. Now there's a recommendation that we change this at the end to actually devolve to the hearings panel the ability to make the decision, because otherwise it comes back to council, and we want to get this dealt with before Christmas so that we can factor it into the LTP. And I'm really open to this, but I'm perfectly happy that the hearings panel is the council, so that we set ourselves up as a single hearings panel, so that way I would chair the hearings panel, and that all councillors are members of the hearings panel, which does mean that you need to hear the oral submissions. Yep. Okay, so hearings panel comprised of the mayor and all councillors, to consider all written and oral submissions received, and to make delegates to the hearings panel the authority to make all decisions in respect of the grant towards the maybe the proposed grant. Yep. All right. So, are there any questions that people have? Pauline, Mike, Sarah, Jimmy.
Yeah, I'm just. I mean, the two options are either borrowing or setting up a targeted rate. But my question is, in 5.18, is that a suggestion, or are we going with that ratio? Or if we wanted an opportunity to, say, extend the time frame and lower the annual payments, is now the time to do that, or is that work to be done in the future?
Probably now is the time to determine that, because that's what you would be consulting on.
Okay, so we're looking at suggesting 10 million over 4 years with an annual targeted rate of $18, but if we were to push that out for 5 years or 8 years, can you tell me what the payments would be for either of those, or another couple of scenarios that you may have?
Yes, I can give you the 5-year option.
Yep.
That's $14.30. I didn't do an 8-year option. I did a 7-year option.
Yep.
That's $10.22, and a 10-year option is $7.15. So, in all cases, the cost to the ratepayer is largely the same, around $72, but it is spread over a longer period.
Right. I mean, because something like a 7-year one would be for your quarterly instalments would be $2.50, which I think would be more appealing to people to actually to do that. That's where I'm coming from. Anyway.
That's a $10 option over 7 years.
Yeah, $10.22 over 7 years. Yeah.
$9 over 8 years.
Yep. So I think that's worth considering, because is 7 years workable for our time frame to have to come up with the 10 million?
I'm not sure when the call will be made on the council to pay.
But gathering the money in advance would mean that we would be able to earn interest on it. So so starting from the first year being the first year of the LTP, we would be ahead of any bills being required to be paid, because ours would kick in at the point that all of the other funding obligations, the insurance, the Crown's offer and the Greater Christchurch Buildings Trust offer, they would all kick in before ours would. So, you know, I think, you know, ours is not an inflation adjusted offer. It would be the $10 million.
Yes, I agree with you about it would accrue interest, which would be helpful.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure what, and I understand the timing as far as where we fall in the sequence. What I'm not sure about is how long it's going to take to rebuild it. So the only risk for 7 years would be that the cathedral was suddenly came together faster than you thought.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's a fairly low risk, personally. I mean, I think I did hear mooted even 10 years to the project.
No, I think that was, yeah. I mean, I've kind of heard that, you know, but there's a period of time for the planning before the build starts. So as I understand it, that you'd be looking at 5 years once that process has begun. So I think we should. I think I'd rather err on the side of caution, because there's no reason why we can't reduce it if, you know, for the final year, if we've already got the money in the bank, as it were.
So we could look at 6 years.
Yeah.
Right.
So
what was the 5 year, Di?
The 5 year is $14.30.
So 6 would be $12, remember?
it's probably around the $12 mark.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's $3 a quarter.
Yep.
That have a nice ring to it. Anyway, Mike.
Thank you. Actually, one of my questions was exactly the same as Pauline's, but the other one is, obviously we're going to create a pot for this $10 million. And so have we actually looked at some of, because obviously we've done a lot of heritage grants, and not all of them get used and can sometimes actually lapse, and then we look to give them out for another heritage projects. Have we actually looked at that and said, well, actually, if they lapse, these ones from previous years, instead of reallocating them to a new project, let's actually put them in that $10 million pot to try and build that up and then reduce the actual impact on the ratepayers. Is there any way that we can actually look at doing something like that?
We could look at that. There is quite a big demand on heritage grants, I know that, but we could certainly go away and do that piece of work. Not for this afternoon, though, if that's when you were wanting it. That depends on your timing.
Yeah, I mean the issue here is in terms of what we go out to consult with, but I mean there's no reason why we can't, you know, when we come to consider the report, that it doesn't, you know, if there's another way of resourcing it that doesn't have an additional impact on the rating base, for example, then we could consider that, and that might lead to a reduction in the overall, you know, amount.
Yeah, because that was my feeling. Like, if we can actually add to the pot as we're going along, then potentially we can stop the targeted rate or the borrowing earlier than anticipated. So.
Yeah, and I think we can make. I mean, we can understand that you know, if we've got the money in the bank, and that's what I was saying before. If we've got the money in the bank, and if the interest has built it up, we can even review at that point that, well, we've already got the 10 million in the bank, so we're done and dusted. Now I've got Sarah and Jimmy and Phil.
Thanks. With a targeted rate, what happens if, for example, we collect the money and then we don't need to use it? So our resolution currently is that we apply ratepayers' money only after all of the other monies have been applied. I mean, in the unlikely event that, you know, they do enough a likely event that they do enough fundraising and all of the council money isn't required, but we've already raised it, what happens to that money? Because
Well, to me, there's several things. Because you're doing it over a series of years, if they actually raise a lot of money, you may well have notice of that before you've reached that point. So you may be able to stop early. But and I have to defer to Ian here. I think if you raise money for a targeted rate specifically and you don't use it, don't you have to refund it?
Yeah.
Yes, I think you would.
And that would be probably quite time consuming and costly as well. So is there a chance, so
Or
for
you
example,
just reduce it?
no, it wouldn't be because people who have paid the rates over time might have then sold their house and moved on, and so you'd have to still get to the people who paid the rates.
But remember, if you're doing it over a period of time,
That's right.
you're able to get a better feel for it, which was
Yeah.
what the Mayor was indicating.
I'm just
earlier.
wondering if we need to start in that first year, because, I mean, it is likely to be a longish project. There's a lot of planning going on first, and as we can adjust it as we go. But whether we need to start collecting a targeted rate that may end up not being applied in the first year of the long-term plan, or whether we can delay it to year 2, 3, indicate that it's there, plan for it. Yeah, but I'm just wary of. I mean, it is one of those things where, you know, we've got the $600 check-in already from someone overseas being sent to you. You know, people are going to want to contribute to this from overseas, and there are a lot of individual ratepayers around the city who don't want their personal money spent on the cathedral, and that will come through the consultation process. But whether we need to rate right from the start or not.
I think those issues will all come up in the consultation process. Jimmy and then Phil.
My question, already she asked already.
Oh, good. Right, Phil.
So, I'm assuming, and I think we all do that. We'll have to that with, for example, the current heritage funding. So a big part of it being the landmark grants. That in fact, council, we would have to review our strategy around those and our funding. And the other part of that too, of course, is that like currently those funds aren't payable until the restoration of buildings is completed.
Yes.
So we'd have to review our strategy. The other thing I wondered is in terms of the fundraising, possibly meaning that council wouldn't need to pay so much. I'm just wondering perhaps in what ways council might be able to join. I think it's the Greater Christchurch Heritage Trust who have been doing the fundraising. How we might be able to join them, say, for example, in supporting exercises like the People's Steeple and fundraising events like that as a council.
I'm not qualified to answer that.
I'm sure we could. I think the part of the Crown offer was an independent fundraising panel or something similar. So if there's an opportunity to be involved with that, we might want to take that up.
Yeah, the People's Steeple is not included in this. The estimated $10 million for the steeple is not included in the government offer. It's separate, completely separate.
We could, yeah, but that could still be a fundraising venture.
Absolutely, it will be. Yeah, no question. Yeah, Yanni.
Thank you. Just had two questions. The first is there anything in terms of a covenant that we're putting on? I mean, normally with our heritage grants, we would put a covenant, and what mechanism is there that we're putting in place if we grant this funding to protect our investment so that the cathedral can't be knocked down in the future if we have another event? Because I couldn't see anything in the proposal that mentioned that.
No, we haven't gone down that particular track as yet. Again, that may be something we look at in more detail through the consultation period, but
so I wasn't here for the original report discussion decision at the extraordinary meeting, but has that been something that has been canvassed in terms of?
No, it wasn't.
No,
so
right.
what we agreed to was the grant in principle.
Yeah.
So there's all of that detailed analysis and work to be done yet. So, but we want to get some feedback from the community first, and then we will consider a report at the end of that process. So we would be ahead of ourselves if we put that up.
It's just
now.
I can see if people were wanting to make a submission and were worried that given what's happened post-earthquake could happen again, they might be reluctant to support it. If they knew or saw that there was some sort of protection from it being demolished in the future, they might think it's a better use.
Yeah.
But second question was just in regards to the funding options. This is obviously a significant contribution, and there's not much discussion about the intergenerational equity of, people right now who are suffering post-earthquake, huge costs in terms of a number of different areas, having to fund a lot of things being built all at the same time. So I just felt that perhaps in terms of the discussion, the idea that it gets paid off over 30 years is also more intergenerational compared to taxing, effectively putting a uniform charge on the current citizens of the city. Have you given much thought to how that could be expressed in the document?
The approach that's been taken is that is a decision that the council is going to make, the option that it wants to choose in terms of how it proposes to fund the proposal. So it's really up to you to decide whether it's through a targeted rate or through borrowing, which would cover that intergenerational thing. We have referred to that in the report.
Sarah?
Paragraphs.
Thanks. Two quick things. First, actually, just off the back of that, is it possible to put both forward for consultation? Both the targeted and the borrowed?
Yes.
And give them as options?
Yes, we can do that.
And so we could actually do that, and people could say whether they want a targeted rate or they want us to borrow and have it paid off over time, and then all of that can be discussed, and that way we get feedback on both. We know that when we only give one option, we really only get feedback on one option, and people don't sort of look beyond that. So whether there's the potential to say, hey, there are two options here, give us your thoughts on both, might be quite good. Okay. And the other point was that if we do the targeted rate and we collect more money than is actually needed, whether it is possible then, if we have already consulted on it and said that we could do this, to put that extra towards council-owned heritage buildings such as Otautahi, our city, any excess that wasn't required for the cathedral.
Yeah, I'd rather go down that track too, because I hadn't appreciated
whether we could actually consult
to pay back
on
the
that.
actual individuals.
Whether we consult on that at the time, if it is a targeted rate that we consult on, and whether we could consult on both, and under the targeted rate thing, say if the targeted rate isn't all needed, then it would go towards council-owned heritage buildings. Yeah. So we could. So agree instead of 3, agree on the mechanism by which the proposed grant will be right, where is it? Instead of 3, agree on the mechanism, put agree that the council will consult on the preferred mechanism to be adopted for the proposed grant should it be approved. And then put a targeted rate, is it? Mm-hmm. Over a period of 6 years, and 2 borrowing. And then an explanation of what that means, because that means an increase in rates. So that goes on the rating base rather than on the targeted. Explanation of those.
Well, it means that somebody in one house will pay more than somebody in another. It's based on the value of your house, and that's why I prefer a targeted rate, because that's my personal view. But if we're going to consult on it, we need to give people the implications of what that is. And the second thing is that should all of the money collected and any interest earned exceed the amount required for our contribution to the cathedral, that it be provided that any additional funds be applied to the restoration work that needs to be done on our own heritage buildings. Yeah. Council-owned heritage buildings. Sorry, did you have a...
I was going to suggest that it might be good, rather than incorporating that into the resolution, to put it forward as an amendment. Because, I mean, my particular view is that we need to keep this as simple as possible. And if we go out with too many options, we'll end up getting feedback that may otherwise be different than we would have got. I think we want to go out with something that's really simple to understand, You know, I mean, what we're talking about is less than the cost of a cup of coffee per quarter. Do you support us doing this or do you not, and tell us why, rather than giving further options within that that might actually provoke a different type of feedback?
Except that, I mean, you know, I'm quite happy, you know, I was going to move this and I was quite happy to look for I mean, my original view was that, but I don't want anyone to think that they're being denied the opportunity to consider what rates on base rates means versus targeted rate. And there is an intergenerational equity thing, but there's also, I mean, I've made it really clear, crystal clear in the outset that this is about that the reason that I went to the Synod to argue for them to, or to present to them why I felt they should accept the government offer and proceed with reinstatement, was because it was the only option on the table that gives us an immediate resolution. Everything else ends up in court. And so the idea that the cost of your house influences how much you pay for certainty now doesn't work for me. So that's why I preferred the targeted rate. But I don't mind that we have a consideration of borrowing, and all that means is that we make the decision on the form after we've done the consultation that invites feedback on it as well. So I'd rather leave it in the resolution and move the resolution as it stands. What was the other point that we were trying to address? About the where any excess and providing that any excess be applied to council applied to council-owned heritage assets. I mean, if they're all repaired by then they could be applied to them for upkeep or anything, you know, like, so it's only applied for, but to council-owned heritage buildings. Yeah, well, I think we should, because, sorry, it just never occurred to me that we would have to go and find the actual every single individual that we collected the rate off. I mean, the chances of this happening are slim. But, you know, you never know. Aaron.
I hold the same position as Andrew around this consultation, and I'd prefer that we did vote now on whether we went with A and B option or just A option in 3. I don't think he's the only one that feels that way. Because when we'd pre-talked about this, we had talked about keeping it as simple as possible. Yep. Well, look, because then the other one is, if we're going to open it up to all sorts of different ways of funding, are people allowed to come in and say, well, I don't want my targeted rate on the cycleways now, I just want it on the cathedral, or I don't want to put any money into swimming pools because I think we've got to. Can they do all of that, or is it?
Paying livestock?
Yeah.
I'm perfectly happy that the that Andrew and you move and second the original motion, and I'll move an amendment, and Sarah will second the amendment. Right. All right. So, is there any discussion? Yanni.
I just will speak now rather than with the amendments, but I think it's really good to go out with the 2 options. I think it is a very clear choice for people, and I don't think it's overcomplicating it. I think it gives people the opportunity to think about how it could be funded, and I think that's a good thing. So, you know, I think one thing to bear in mind is, although we haven't increased our uniform annual general charge for a few years, we have applied the active travel rate. We've also put on the waste minimisation rate. So actually the uniform annual general charge has increased quite considerably over a number of years, and what we know from previous discussions around our long-term plans is that effectively means that the people on the lowest property values end up paying a higher quantum percentage of the cost. So my personal preference would be to go for borrowing because it also supports the intergenerational issue. And I think the current generation has faced a huge increase in costs associated with post-earthquake Christchurch. So, but I think it's fair to go out with both options rather than limit ourselves to one today. If we were going with one, I would support the borrowing, but I think it is fair to go out with two, and that's why I'd support that.
Yeah. Glenn?
Oh, thank you. I was happy with the original, but just thinking about the two options there, I guess my thought is I wouldn't want how we rate to become the story or to distract us from it. I would rather hear the enthusiasm of the city, hopefully, although I have to keep an open mind, for restoration of the cathedral, given that it could serve to unite the city. We'll see the old crafts on show, and I think its central location will probably serve to open people's wallets. I think we may be pleasantly surprised, but I don't want us to get tangled up in how we're actually going to fund this. And so on those grounds, I think it might be good to have the two options.
Yeah, Sarah?
I think it's really important that we go out with the two options and that they're really clearly explained to people. But I think actually we have to remember that there's three options on the table that we're consulting on. So there is whether we put $10 million in with a targeted rate, whether we put $10 million in through borrowing, or whether we choose not to put $10 million in, because that is actually the third option. There is a do nothing. That's the point of the consultation. It's the do we pitch in $10 million. And so I think we need to be really clear in the consultation that actually we're doing three options, two of which authorise funding and one of which doesn't. Thanks.
Yeah, Andrew, Mike.
Thank you. I mean, I made some comments earlier. I just think keeping this simple is absolutely the way to go. I wouldn't normally support what's essentially an increase in the uniform annual charge. I normally, by default, would go for a value-based rating mechanism, but the amounts that we're talking about here are so low, and I think there's value to being able to call out that relatively low amount as a dollar figure per rating unit, rather than the possible feedback from the consultation being around the mechanism that we're choosing. The question for the people of Christchurch here is whether we fund this or whether we don't. The mechanism that we use when we're talking about such low amounts, I think, could easily lead to a conversation which is different than the one we want to have, which is hearing from the people of Christchurch whether or not we do this. So, as I say, my normal position would be to go for a value-based rating mechanism rather than increase in uniform annual charge. But in this case, I think for ease of understanding and clarity of feedback, it would be good just to go out with the one option as originally proposed. Yeah, comments over and above that. I mean, I certainly am pleased that we've moved very quickly to go out for consultation. I think it'll provide the necessary certainty when we hear back from the people, and I look forward to hearing the feedback.
Yep. Sorry. I've got this. Is it? Who was next? Mike and Aaron. Sorry.
Thank you. And I also can't support the amendment with going out with two different funding mechanisms. I think we need to keep this simple, and it comes down to really two things. Does the public want us to fund the cathedral repairs through rates, or do they not? And if we go out with simple information, if this is how much it's going to cost you over this many years, then it's easy for them to make that decision, and it's easy for us to listen to that and then make our own decision.
Aaron?
Yeah, I would urge my fellow councillors to vote in favour of the initial report, which is to go out with a targeted rate, because it lets every single household in Christchurch know exactly how much they'll be putting in. It's less than a cup of coffee per quarter. It is really clear and simple. If we open it up, basically no one will know how much they're paying. If it's based on your property value, it'll be extremely hard to work that out. It does mean some people will pay 5 times more for the restoration of the cathedral than others. That's a given. And so there's it is about keeping it simple. If we want to start making it really, really mucky, and we give out other options, because this is, do we do it or do we not put this funding in, then other ones will come in and people have the opportunity to come and say, well, actually, I don't want that pool in Linwood anymore, and that's the same amount of money. That can go to the cathedral. I don't want the hot pools in Brighton. They will come up with that stuff if we open up the hornet's nest. Right. And this will potentially be a hornet's nest, and I'm more than happy to play with hornets if everyone else wants to, because it's entertaining, but it will not be productive.
Those stinging remarks. I shall put the amendment. Oh, sorry, Jamie. I forgot.
Yeah, I won't support the amendment. I think that having an amendment like this just is a prime example of getting caught up with the process and losing sight of the outcome, and I think that's what will be achieved, with the residents. There's a big question that we want to ask our ratepayers, and we want to get genuine feedback on, and that is, would you like to see the council help restore the cathedral? Consultation inherently doesn't preclude anything, and I think fundamentally you don't know what you don't know. So as we go into a process where we're going to hear submissions, there'll be a range of different ideas that we'll hear, and we can't sit around the table by committee and start guessing or preempting what will come up and what's valid to come up and what's not valid to come up. And I think the really sad thing about the amendment, more than anything else, is that all of a sudden the narrative around this is that there could be someone in the community that pays 5 or 6 or 7 times more than someone else for restoring the cathedral, and it loses sight of a pretty fundamental question that we're asking. So if you want it to be about borrowing and the methods for how that's being funded, then it's kind of an irrelevant conversation that's happening on the side that kind of loses sight of a more important issue. So I think that it's straight out red herring, and it would just be, a hornet's nest, I think was an expression that was used earlier, and it would just be a real hornet's nest to open up, and I don't know why you'd want to. So nothing's precluded by going to consultation anyway. Everything's on the table, but it just muddies the waters asking that sort of stuff anyway. So ignore it, and I urge you to not support the amendment.
Right, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
That's lost. Does anyone particularly want to record which way they voted? Sarah, Yanni?
Oh, yeah.
And
well, I guess we could.
No.
Just the no's, Jamie.
No, just the yeses.
You actually put up the amendment.
You just said, do you want it recorded how you voted?
The amendment was to consult on the 2 options. Yeah. So that's just Sarah and Yanni. I don't have a strong view either way. I don't care what my view's recorded. And so now we go to the original resolution, which we're just going agree that a targeted rate will be the mechanism by which the proposed grant will be funded should the council approve the proposed grant. So, a question.
Just for clarification, in terms of agreeing to that, is it possible to agree to that as the preferred mechanism, but also have information on the other one? And what happens if people make submissions asking for the second one that we've rejected? Can we still choose to fund it through that?
We could, but we're
simple.
Oh, I see. Agreeing. No, we're agreeing now that the targeted rate will be the mechanism by which the proposed grant will be funded.
But that's for consultation. If
no,
we get
we're not consulting on the mechanism. We're going to, we're in the middle of a vote, so I'm accepting a question probably that's out of order. Did you have a question? Yep.
I just had a question on the growth, our projected growth over the next 6 years or whatever.
No, that's not relevant. We're into voting, so unless it's a technical question about the vote, what we're voting on. So this is agreeing that the targeted rate will be the mechanism by which the proposed grant will be funded should the council approve the proposed grant.
Can I just make a point? Perhaps we should say a targeted rate over 6 years.
Over 6 years.
And can we just have that one put separate?
Well, we just voted for the amendment, which was lost. So you can, if you and Sarah want to oppose that I'm happy for that to be recorded. For item 3, so that's Yarni and Siri, so it's just the inverse of the other vote. And on that note, I will put the resolution. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much. And